Hey, hey. What's wrong with this picture?
Nice night for a walk, eh?
Nice night for a walk.
Wash day tomorrow. Nothing clean, right?
Nothing clean. Right.
Hey, I think this guy's a couple cans short of a six-pack.
Your clothes. Give them to me. Now.
You won't be needing any clothes. I've been waiting for you.
Thank you for watching Cody and Joey Reviews. I'm Joey.
And I'm Cody.
So today we're going to be reviewing Terminator Genisys. And in the clip you just saw, Arnold Schwarzenegger battles himself in a recreated CGI model from 1984.
Exactly. Now, we should really start with our experience with the Terminator series. I think we're both pretty much fans of the series.
Big time.
At least for me, I love the first two Terminators. I think they're some of the more classic, most iconic Terminator films out there. The other two, Terminator 3 and Terminator 4, I can take or leave with either one of them. Terminator 3 is probably one of my least favorite Terminator films out there, but Terminator Salvation, not a bad science fiction war film, but honestly just no real taste to it. And yourself?
Yeah, so with me, I mean, Terminator 2 Judgment Day was one of the first DVDs that I ever had. So I watched the film literally, 50 times as of now, between maybe like 2002 to 2015.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my favorite movies. I mean, if anybody asks me like my top 5, that's usually at the very top, along with like The Dark Knight, Toy Story 2, you name it. But, you know, I ended up seeing Terminator 3 when it came out. That was, I think, one of the first art movies that I snuck into. So, and I was waiting for Terminator Salvation for a very long time as well. That was a 6-year hiatus between 2003 and 2009. And when Arnold wasn't in it, I still wanted to give it a chance because it had Christian Bale. And I ended up liking it at first, but over time it ended up feeling kind of like a Transformers ripoff. Now, also given, I watched Terminator 1, and that's also an amazing movie. You can clearly see the difference between T1 and T2 compared to T3 and T4. James Cameron made 2 legendary films. They just, and I think another thing that people complain about is that maybe T3 and T4 weren't necessary because the story really ended at T2. So now here we are at Terminator Genisys.
Yes. Sort of a prequel slash reboot slash something or another.
It's a mix of a bunch of things.
Very much sort of throwing everything into the pot, trying to make it work. Honestly, I have to say, walking out of the theater, I wasn't that impressed. In fact, I guess expectations really helped here. I went in with very low expectations, and honestly, it wasn't as bad as I had thought it was going to be.
Okay.
But still, there was a whole lot of plot holes in this movie, a whole lot of things that don't really make sense in between robots shooting other robots. It got tiring a little bit, and then trying to explain this garbled timeline that they have. You know, sort of taking out everything that didn't work and adding some new things, messing with the chronology, and honestly, it ends up being a mess of a movie, in my own opinion. And also, Jake Courtney, it can't be understated how miscast this character is. Not only does he not look like Kyle Reese from the first 2 Terminator films, but also he doesn't have the behaviors, the mannerisms, really nothing at all about the original character.
I need answers, all right, right now.
Nobody else comes through. It's just him and me.
The original character. But yeah, definitely. And I think Arnold Schwarzenegger in this movie, really, he doesn't have the charm he had in the 80s, I would think. Arnold Schwarzenegger in his 80s movies always had a charm with his audience, a winking, nudging, sort of fun with it.
Sweetheart, we're married.
Consider that a divorce.
And although Arnold Schwarzenegger has a few good lines in here and a few good winky sort of moments towards his audience, honestly, I think he didn't really hit the ball here. I just think maybe he doesn't have the charm he had back in the 80s, but I didn't really connect with his character. Honestly, I still connect with Sarah Connor. I think Emilia Clarke, who plays Sarah Connor this time, does a pretty good job. She's a pretty good stand-in for Linda Hamilton. What were your thoughts on this movie?
Well, so like with this movie, as you mentioned, it's like a mix of like a reboot and like a sequel. And what was really clever about it is that Alan Taylor, the director, recreated like the original scenes from the first Terminator, where Arnold appears and he walks into LA and you see the Griffith Observatory, and he goes and tries to take the clothes from the punks. But
nice night for a walk, eh?
Nice night for a walk.
Wash day tomorrow. Nothing clean, right?
Nothing clean, right?
Hey, I think this guy's a couple cans short of a six-pack.
Your clothes. Give them to me.
punks. But at that point, though, you see an older Arnold Schwarzenegger known as the Guardian, and he's programmed to protect Sarah Connor, and they end up fighting, as you saw like in the clip earlier. So at that point, the entire timeline gets changed from James Cameron's films.
Almost entirely.
And it gets a little complicated because, as you heard, like Arnold's character uses the term nexus point to describe a different timeline, but at the same time acknowledging the original timeline still exists. So in this film, yet again, they're trying to stop Judgment Day from happening, but instead of August 29th, 1997, they go to 2017. Now, one of the big things that got me interested in watching the film was that Arnold Schwarzenegger comes back to star in Terminator. And I mean, to me, that was a very big motivator to come watch the movie. Now, another concern that I had that it was PG-13 because Terminator Salvation didn't do that good at the box office because I thought, like, one, like there was no Arnold, and two, they watered it down to PG-13.
Yes.
This one was also PG-13, but I felt it less than Salvation because the Terminators were still brutal. They still killed people. They didn't throw them around, and they had, a couple of bad words. So, but I wanted to comment on Jai Courtney as well. I thought he was horrible as Kyle Reese, and that's one of the most disappointing things when you see an actor like that. It really kind of describes, to me at least, what's wrong with Hollywood. Like, when they let people get these roles just by connections. I mean, and like it's sad because when like he was interviewed about if he looked at Michael Biehn's performance, he didn't even bother. He just wanted to play it himself. And Michael Biehn actually took the time to learn about soldiers living in camps, living in trenches, and kind of how they, how their personalities were with that post-traumatic stress. You can clearly see it with Michael Biehn. I mean, he made the movie.
Yeah. And you mentioned, his romance between, Sarah Connor. It was not believable this time. I mean, you see in the first movie, when he's coming out and confessing his love to Sarah Connor, you believe it. You really feel like he loves her and that she loves him back. In this movie, they try to play that same dynamic to lesser effect. Mm-hmm. They have one moment in a locker scene where they're trying to connect with each other and all that, and it's a pretty good moment, but all in all, I just didn't feel a connection between those two characters. And you mentioned the PG-13 rating, where you didn't feel like it felt PG-13, like Terminator Salvation. I honestly did. There were many moments that I felt like the PG-13 rating was hampering the series, and honestly, I wish it were R-rated, because the first two Terminators, they were really good at making you fear the machines. Back in the 80s, it was a real concern with communism.
Gosh, yeah.
I mean, it's probably one of the reasons Arnold Schwarzenegger got the role. I mean, audiences back then probably couldn't tell the difference between an Austrian and a Russian accent, so it was an obvious parable of the fear of Cold War and communism and the fear of nuclear annihilation. This movie does not have that fear, and I feel like it really hampers the movie's message that we should fear this future technology, because I just don't get that these machines are dangerous. Now, you do mention that they stab people and all that, but it's usually just security guards, usually not main characters. I never feel our main characters are in any danger at all, mainly because they never really set up that they're in danger.
Mm-hmm. And I think that you made a very good point about how like T1 and T2 kind of took place, a little during the Cold War, and of course when Terminator 2 came out in 1991, the Cold War just ended. but I mean, there was a big fear of like, nuclear war and, the unknown future with technology kind of taking over and becoming dominant. Now, since we live in 2015, I mean, computers have basically taken over already. So, that fear of the nuclear war by machines seems a little more far-fetched to achieve towards the audience. And with this film, they tried to use this app called Genisys, which connects all your devices together, but at the same time, we have that already. We have iCloud, we have Google Drive, you have all that already.
And it is kind of terrifying to think about how connected we all are to each other through this faceless sort of technology that we have. There is actually a line that I really like in this movie where he says, in a few hours we'll all be connected, and Sarah Connor says, connected to what? And the kid doesn't have a response. Yeah, that is kind of terrifying, but the rest of the movie doesn't really have that fear. Like, it's just another robot shooting another robot type of action movie. And that was a real disappointment because the Terminator series was never really like that. They always predicated on the fear of future, the fear of technology, fear of nuclear war. This movie is just a basic, subpar action film, I feel like.
Now, given, I'm a big fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's breaking my heart a little bit that this film just finished, number 3 in the box office when Inside Out and Jurassic World have been in theaters for weeks now. And the reason for that is because Arnold wants to do a sequel to Conan, he wants to do triplets. I mean, he wants to continue to make movies, and I mean, I feel like no one's interested anymore because he doesn't have the muscles that he had in 1984 and 1991.
No, and he doesn't really even have the charm. I mean, I've seen some of his recent movies like The Expendables and Expendables 2, and yeah, he's definitely trying, he just doesn't have it anymore. Honestly, his performance in this movie is on par with what it was in T3, and I didn't really like him in T3 all that much.
Well, given, my favorite part of this film was Arnold. I feel like he made the movie, and without him, I would have liked it a lot less. Now, in this movie, they make him a lot more human because he's been around for a while. So, I mean, his story arc could almost relate to, Arnold right now. I mean, one of the big lines that he says is old, not obsolete. Yeah. And that's almost like Arnold Schwarzenegger trying to send a message to audiences that he still has it somewhere. In my opinion, I thought he did a better performance than T3. Definitely not as good as T2 and T1.
Nah, he didn't really have the... He didn't have the humanity to it. I mean, John Connor, when they were teaching the Terminator humanity in T2, you really feel a connection here, and here it's just sort of like, oh, well, I tried to be human in T2, so I'm going to try to do that here. I mean, not a whole lot of his jokes work for me. I mean, the whole mating joke that they had between Kyle and Sarah, I thought that was a cute running joke, but the whole him trying to smile, trying to harken back to, his trying to smile in Terminator 2, it honestly felt forced, and I didn't enjoy it all that much.
Yeah. So there was a deleted scene in Terminator 2, and I think it's also in the extended version, where John Connor tries to make the Terminator more human and make him smile. And
You're great.
That's good. Maybe you could practice in front of a mirror or something.
And he tries to attempt it, and it ends up being funny because he's a machine and it's not natural. Now, the joke was used in this movie 3 times. So, the first time I thought, okay, that was pretty clever.
Yeah, it was cute, basically.
But then they had a really ridiculous scene in the middle where they play bad boys, and they're taking mugshots of each other, and Arnold yet again smiles. And they have it at the very end, and I don't want to spoil what happens at the end, but, there's, I think, what I can say is that the joke gets a little old, and I feel like that wasn't necessary to overuse.
No, it was definitely overplayed by the time they did it the 3rd time. So, if I had to rate this movie, it really breaks my heart because I really love the first 2 Terminator films, and I wasn't expecting it to be good. None of the trailers ever told me that this movie was going to be great, but I was really hoping that there would be something to this movie that would give me, hope that we can continue on with the Terminator series here. There is no hope for me, really. I don't like this movie. I think it isn't the worst in this series. I will still go on record to say Terminator 3 is still the worst. But honestly, this is probably in my top contenders for the worst films of the year. We'll have to see. 2015's not over yet. We're only halfway through summer. But if I were to rate it, this movie is a muddled mess. I can't, even describe how wrong Jai Courtney is for this role. I'm going to have to give it the lowest rating I've given any movie on this site, 1.5 out of 5 stars.
Okay.
I'm not going to say it's entirely terrible. Again, there are a few things I like. There are a few jokes. Some of the special effects, although not great, are still pretty good, considering what they had to work with. But, thinking about the plot, thinking about everything, I don't really like all the characters, especially J.K. Simmons' character, who is completely pointless in this movie, but yeah, 1.5 out of 5 stars, and it's a real disappointment walking out of this movie for me.
So my expectations were a little lower. However, going into the film, I enjoyed it a lot, and I personally rank it the 3rd best Terminator film, above Salvation and above 3. And that's because I felt like it stays true to the message that James Cameron had in Terminator 2, where there is no fate but what we make for ourselves. Terminator 3 contradicts that, and Terminator Salvation doesn't have Schwarzenegger's character in it. So the pros for the film, I would say, is that you have Arnold back, you try to twist on the original events, and they definitely pay respect at the beginning to Cameron's original films. But the cons, I'd have to say, is it was PG-13 when it should have clearly been R. This is an R-rated franchise, and I don't know why they can't get that message. And number 2, it's really depressing how they cast Jai Courtney as Kyle Reese when Jai Courtney wouldn't even respect the original films. And look at Michael Bihn's performance. He's a bland actor. He has no charisma, and it's ironic that a Terminator would have more charisma than Kyle Reese.
Definitely, I would say Arnold Schwarzenegger. At least he has a tiny glimmer of charm in here, whereas Jai Courtney has none at all. And the fact that they're trying to hoist him as a new action star really gets on my nerves.
It does to me too. Like, he ruined the Die Hard franchise, and we'll see what happens in the box office ultimately with this film, if the overseas is going to save it, and even if it profits, will they make a sequel? I don't know, but I would rate the film 3.5 stars out of 5. So it's definitely much different from Cody's score, as you can tell.
Yeah, very much. I'm actually kind of surprised to hear that, but I guess we're not too far off. It's just that you found more entertainment in this movie than I did, whereas you were still enjoying Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was not, and honestly, I was just waiting for the movie to end. And
I'll be honest, if Arnold wasn't in the film, my score may have been similar to Cody's, if not the same.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today.
And stay tuned.
I'll be back. Stay here. I'll be back.
Daddy, don't move.
She'll be back.
What should I tell your men when they find out you're gone?
I'll be back.
I'll be back.